So the Aryans had carved up India into a dozen or so little countries. But then in the 300s, we've got the emergence of India's first centralized empire, their first centralized government, and that's called the Mauryan Empire. A guy named Chandragupta Maurya, he was the ruler of one of the little kingdoms, conquers his neighbors, conquers even more after that, and eventually unites what you saw on the map, much of modern India into one empire. Chandragupta was a ruthless leader, but he was a very efficient one. He was very competent, and the empire did very well underneath him. Then his grandson, Ashoka, the next ruler of the Mauryan Empire, is a real different kind of person and a very fascinating character. So Ashoka begins as a sort of regular king, regular emperor. He continues on with the conquests of his family, his father and grandfather who came before him, and he completes this one conquest that he knew that they always wanted to do, and he completes it and conquers these people. So he begins his career as sort of a very typical emperor, very smart, very good at conquering, and that's what he does. Then, later in his life, he undergoes this very interesting conversion to Buddhism. He becomes a Buddhist, and he becomes a very different, very interesting kind of ruler. He starts talking about, we should have nonviolence, that everyone should sort of understand each other. He starts practicing, tolerance. He's very tolerant of other religions. He becomes this just very enlightened ruler. And he's just this especially fascinating character because he begins his career on a certain path and then midway through undergoes this big transformation, stays the ruler of India and is this very, very efficient, very good ruler. But he just has these very interesting ideas for a ruler of, again, nonviolence, and he's very passionate about the spread of Buddhism. He goes and sends Buddhist missionaries out, and Buddhism spreads to all different parts of Asia a lot because of him and what he does. Under Ashoka, the Mauryan Empire does very well, but not too long in historical terms after his death, the Mauryan Empire falls apart. So his successors aren't as good as he is, and just the whole thing breaks apart into a bunch of different pieces. The kingdoms that remain, though, stay wealthy. There are definitely a lot of money going around India, and one of the reasons for that is that the Silk Road runs. Part of it runs through India, part of it goes sort of north of India, but there's money flowing around that area. The Silk Road is something that'll be important. It's important now when we're studying India, it'll be important for China, and it's important for Rome. So it has this great impact, we've got to talk about it. The Silk Road was actually a bunch of different roads, as you hopefully should see in a map. It was a couple different paths. It was very generally this large trade route, again, this sort of highway of early globalization where goods were traded back and forth all the way from China to Central Asia to India to Arabia to Greece all the way to Rome. And goods, it's called the Silk Road because silk, which was exclusively made in China, would travel along this road, gaining value over the journey, and would eventually get to Rome and would be sold for this gigantic amount of money. It was a big luxury good in Rome. Romans loved to wear their silk stuff. So silk was traded on it, but there was also a lot of other things that were traded on it as well. And so you'd get on the Silk Road and you'd go from India to Greece, or you'd be a merchant, you'd go from China to India, and you would sell your stuff for a big profit. So it was the beginning of the world sort of starting to tie together, starting to trade goods back and forth with one another. That's of course sort of how the world is everywhere now. We're connected to every different part of the globe. This is the very beginnings of that. The next empire to rise up in India is the Gupta Empire. So after the Mauryans fall, it's divided for a while, and then the Guptas come up and they conquer a bunch, but not the south. So they conquer the north in the sort of northern, as you can see on the map, spot, that's the Gupta area, but they were never able to conquer the south. You're going to see this when we study India pretty much every time we go to India. There's this real difference between the north and the south. You'll see empires that exist in one area and don't exist in another, even though, like, modern day today, India would be a country that would have the north and the south of that particular land that you're thinking of. Back in the day, often they were separate. Often the north and south were sort of separate countries, and that's the sort of that's the roots of a lot of the cultural sort of divisions that one sees today. Under the Guptas, India flourished. It was this very, prosperous region. It was a region of learning. It was a very much this, powerful sort of, first world empire, and that, was very strategically placed along the Silk Road. India is doing sort of just very well around this time, and that is where we will leave India for today. So remember, they got the Mauryan Empire, Chandragupta, Ashoka, you've got the Silk Road, which is what makes the region sort of worth controlling in the first place, and then just, real briefly sort of after that, you've got the Guptas are the next to rise up in the area. So that's early Indian politics for you.